3 people watched me lock up the bait shop on the night of October 11th. The security camera at the gas station across the highway recorded me at 9:47 p.m. pulling the metal grate down over the front door. My uncle's old neighbor, a woman named Doreen Pickett, who lives in the trailer behind the shop, saw me from her kitchen window and waved. The driver of the last car to leave the parking lot, a charter fishing captain named Russ Halloran, honked twice as he pulled out, and I waved back at him. 3 witnesses, 2 cameras, one of them mine, the interior camera I had installed myself in August, which recorded me from a different angle, also at 9:47 p.m., locking the door from the inside, on the wrong side of the grate, and walking back into the shop instead of out of it. I have both recordings. Yes, they are time-stamped from the same atomic clock source. They show the same person in the same clothing performing 2 different actions at the same moment, in the same building, on the same night. Comment where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I'm asking because I want to know how many of you are awake at hours when you should not be, the way I am awake now, the way I have been awake every night since October 11th. My name is Matthew Crane. I am 34 years old. I inherited a bait and tackle shop on the Outer Banks of North Carolina from my uncle, Donald Crane, who died in his sleep in late June at the age of 71. My uncle had owned the shop for 38 years. I had visited it as a child, 3 or 4 summers in the late 90s when my parents were still married. Then I had not been back since I was 12. The shop was on a stretch of highway between Avon and Buxton, the kind of place that survives because charter captains stop in for live bait at 4 in the morning, and tourists wander in during the day looking for fishing licenses. The shop came with the building, a 1/4 acre of land, and a single-wide trailer behind it that my uncle had been renting to Doreen Pickett for 22 years for $300 a month. I was working in IT in Raleigh. The company had been doing layoffs for 18 months, and I knew I was on the next list. The inheritance came at a moment when I needed it to come, and I drove down to the Outer Banks in early July with the idea that I would assess the property, sell it, and use the money to weather whatever was about to happen with my career. Yet I had told my girlfriend it would take a week. It took longer than that for reasons I am going to explain. The first thing I should say is that the shop was making money. I had assumed it was not. A small bait and tackle shop on a forgotten stretch of highway, run by an old man in his 70s, did not seem like the kind of business that would have a real income. The book said otherwise. My uncle had cleared just under $90,000 in profit the previous year. He had cleared similar amounts every year for the past decade. The shop had a steady commercial clientele of charter captains who came in between 3 and 5 a.m., paid cash for live bait, and left. The cash register tape from any given morning told the same story. 40 to 60 transactions before sunrise, almost all of them in cash, and almost all of them between $30 and $120. The shop was a small machine that produced money quietly, every night, and had been doing so for 38 years. I decided not to sell it, not immediately. I decided to run it for a season, learn it, document the operations, and then make a decision in the spring. I called my girlfriend. We had a long argument. She did not move down. We are no longer together. That is a different story, and I am not going to tell it here, except to say that the bait shop cost me my relationship before it cost me anything else. My uncle had not left an instruction manual for the shop. He had not left notes on the suppliers, the regular customers, the maintenance schedule for the bait tanks, or the seasonal rhythms of the business. What he had left was a single yellow legal pad in the bottom drawer of the desk in the back office. The legal pad had 31 pages of writing on it, in his handwriting, which was small and slanted and difficult to read. The first 26 pages were ordinary. They were notes on supplier contacts, prices for various bait, the combination to the safe, the location of the spare keys, the schedule for the trash pickup, the procedure for cleaning the bait tanks, the names and approximate visiting hours of the most regular charter captains. The pages were practical. They read like the notes of a man who had decided, at some point in his last few years, that he should write down what he knew in case he was hit by a truck. The last 5 pages of the legal pad were different. The last 5 pages were a list, and the list had a heading at the top, underlined 3 times, that said, "Things you must know." Below the heading were 11 numbered items. The handwriting was the same, but the entries were shorter and more careful, written one at a time, the way a person writes when they want to be sure each item is exactly correct. Some of the entries had dates next to them, going back almost 20 years. The earliest dated entry was from 2006. The most recent was from May of this year, 6 weeks before my uncle died. I read the list once on my second night in the shop. I sat at my uncle's desk in the back office, with the door to the shop closed, and I read it under the lamp, and I read it twice, and then I closed the legal pad, and I put it back in the drawer, and I went to the trailer where I was sleeping, and I lay awake for a long time. And I'm going to give you the items as I learned what they meant. I am going to give you the witnesses as they came into the story, because the witnesses are what makes this story something other than a man going slowly out of his mind in an old building by the side of a highway. Without the witnesses, I would have packed up and left. With the witnesses, I could not, because the witnesses confirmed that whatever was happening was not happening only to me. The first witness was Doreen Pickett. Doreen is 68 years old. She is a retired postal worker. She moved into the trailer behind the shop in 2003 after her husband died, and she has lived there for 22 years. She knew my uncle better than anyone alive. When I arrived in July, she came over with a casserole and introduced herself and told me she had been my uncle's friend, yet not his girlfriend, and she wanted me to know that up front so there would be no awkwardness. She said my uncle had been a private man and a kind one. She said she had been crying for 3 weeks. She said if I had any questions about how he had run the shop, I should ask her because she had paid attention. I asked her on my 4th night about the list in the legal pad. She was sitting on the porch of her trailer, drinking iced tea. The sun had just gone down. I had brought over a 6-pack of beer because I had been told this was the customary thing to do with Doreen, and I had a bottle open in my hand. I asked her if she had ever heard my uncle talk about a list of rules for the shop. I did not describe the list. I did not tell her what was on it. I just asked if she had heard him mention it. She set down her iced tea. And she looked at me for a long time. She said, "Did you find the legal pad?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Did you read all of it?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Then I am going to tell you what I told him in 2007 when he came over to my trailer at 2 in the morning, shaking like a leaf. I told him to sell the shop. He did not sell the shop. He stayed for another 18 years. He died in his sleep, which is more than some of his predecessors got. If you are smart, you will sell the shop. If you are like him, you will not. Either way, you should know that I am not going to discuss the items on that list with you, because I have my own list, which is shorter, and one of the items on my list is that I do not discuss the items on his list. I have lived behind that shop for 22 years. The reason I am still alive is that I have rules. Yet you should make rules of your own. You should follow them. And you should not ask me about the list again." She picked up her iced tea. She took a sip. She looked out at the highway. She did not look at me again that night. I went back to the shop. I sat at the desk. I opened the legal pad. I read the 11 items again, slower this time. I am going to give you the first 3 now, because the first 3 are the ones I tested in my first month, and the first 3 are the ones that brought the second witness into the story. Item 1 said, "Do not sell live bait to anyone after midnight on the night of a new moon." The dates are in the almanac on the shelf above the cash register. If a customer comes in after midnight on a new moon and asks for live bait, tell them you are out. Show them the empty tanks if you have to. Do not sell. Guys, do not explain why. Item 2 said, "The tanks must be drained, scrubbed, and refilled every Wednesday morning before sunrise. Not Tuesday night, not Wednesday afternoon. Wednesday morning before sunrise. Use the well water from the tap behind the building. Not the municipal water, not the bottled water. The well water. If you are sick or out of town and cannot do this yourself, pay Doreen to do it. She will charge you $40. She will not explain why she charges $40 instead of $20. Pay her the $40. Item 3 said, "When the phone rings between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., let it go to voicemail. Listen to the voicemail in the morning, in daylight, with the front door of the shop open and at least one other person in the building. Do not listen to the voicemails alone. Do not listen to them at night. If the voicemail contains a name you recognize, do not return the call. If the voicemail asks you to come somewhere, do not go. Save the voicemail. Write down the date and time and any names mentioned. Keep the records." I read those 3 items and I told myself I was going to follow them. The way you tell yourself you are going to humor an eccentric uncle who has died and left you a business. I did not believe them. I thought my uncle had been an old man who had developed superstitions over decades of working alone at strange hours, and that I, a 34-year-old IT professional from Raleigh, would follow his procedures out of respect, not because I thought they mattered. The new moon that month was on July 24th. I worked the night shift, 4 a.m. to noon, the way my uncle had worked it. Yeah, because that was when the charter captains came in for bait. I was in the shop at midnight on July 24th because I had been there since 11 for inventory, and I was planning to stay through the early morning rush. The shop was empty. The lights in the parking lot were on. The cash register was closed. I was sitting on a stool behind the counter reading a fishing magazine, killing time until the captains started arriving. At 12:14 a.m. the door opened. A man came in. He was in his 50s, weather-beaten, wearing a faded baseball cap and a windbreaker. He looked like every charter captain I had met in the previous 3 weeks. He nodded at me. He walked to the back of the shop where the live bait tanks were. He stood in front of the Menhaden tank and he turned to me and he said, "5 dozen Menhaden, cash." I said sure, and I went to the back. I started netting the bait. I had done this maybe 40 times by then. It took about 3 minutes for 5 dozen. I was halfway through with my hand in the tank when I remembered item 1. I want to be honest about what happened in my body when I remembered. I had been thinking about a fishing magazine article. I had been counting fish. I had been thinking about whether to ask the man if he wanted ice. The thought of item 1 came to me suddenly and completely, the way you remember you left the stove on. I stopped netting. I looked up at the man. He was standing on the other side of the counter, watching me. He smiled. I said, "I'm sorry, I was wrong. We're out of Menhaden tonight. I forgot we sold the last of them this afternoon." He said, "There are fish in the tank. I can see them." I said, "Those are reserved. If they're for a regular customer who's coming in at 4, I can't sell them. I'm sorry. I have shrimp. I have squid. I have some pinfish if you want those." He stood there for a long time looking at me. He did not move. His smile did not change. The fluorescent light above the bait tanks hummed. He said, "Don, you know me. You've sold me menhaden 100 times." I had not told him my name. My name is not Don. My uncle's name was Don. I had been wearing a name tag earlier that day that said Matthew, but I had taken it off when I got tired of charter captains asking me who I was, because I had been planning to print new ones with my actual position listed under the name. The name tag was on the desk in the back office. I was not wearing it. There was no way for the man to know my uncle's name unless he had been in the shop before, which was possible, which was likely, except that he had called me Don, not you, not buddy, not man, and he had said it as if he were correcting me, as if he were reminding me of who I was. I said, "I'm not Don. Don was my uncle. He passed away in June. I'm running the shop now. My name is Matthew." The man's smile did not change. He said, "I know." He turned around. He walked out of the shop. I heard his car start. I did not hear it pull out of the parking lot because I was already moving toward the front window to see what he was driving. And by the time I got to the window, the parking lot was empty, and the highway was empty, and there was no sound of an engine in either direction. I went back to the bait tank. I finished netting the menhaden I had started netting. I dumped them back in the tank. I went to the back office. I sat at the desk. I opened the legal pad to item 1, and I read it again. I want to tell you that I followed all 11 items perfectly after that. I did not. I followed items 1, 2, and 3. I had no reason to test the others, because the others had not yet been triggered by the patterns of the shop, and I did not understand yet that the patterns of the shop were a calendar that the items in the legal pad were keyed to. The second witness came into the story on August 14th, 6 weeks into my time at the shop. His name was Russ Halloran. He was the charter captain who would later honk at me on October 11th. He was 61 years old. He had been buying bait from my uncle for almost 30 years. He came in 3 or 4 mornings a week, always around 4:30, always for the same order, 2 dozen mullet and a dozen pinfish. He paid in cash, exact change, every time. He had been one of the first people to come in after I took over, and he had been kind to me about my uncle's death. He had told me my uncle was the most reliable man he had ever done business with. He had told me he hoped I would keep the shop going. On August 14th, a Thursday, Russ came in at 4:30 as usual. He was a few minutes early. He had a coffee in his hand. He set the coffee on the counter while I bagged his order. He was looking at me strangely. He said, "Matthew, I want to ask you something, and I do not want you to think I am crazy." I said, "Okay." He said, "Last Friday night, around midnight, I was driving home from a late charter. I drove past the shop. The lights were on. The door was open. You were standing in the parking lot talking to somebody, a man in a windbreaker. I waved at you. You waved back. I figured you were closing up late. I did not think anything of it until I came in this morning and I saw the schedule on the wall behind you. The schedule says you were closed last Friday. The schedule says you were not here. Were you here last Friday at midnight?" I had not been at the shop the previous Friday at midnight. I had driven up to Norfolk to see a friend. I had left the shop at 8 p.m. on Thursday, and I had not come back until Saturday morning. The schedule on the wall behind me, which was the schedule I had posted for Doreen's reference because she sometimes came over to check on the shop when I was gone, said exactly that. Closed Friday, Return Saturday, 9 a.m. I said, Russ, I was in Norfolk last Friday. I was not at the shop. Russ looked at me for a long moment. He said, Matthew, I am telling you, I drove past at midnight. I saw you in the parking lot. You were wearing the same shirt you have on right now, the blue one with the shop logo. You waved at me. I have known your uncle for 28 years, and I have known you for 6 weeks. And I am telling you, the man I saw in the parking lot was you. I did not know what to say. I said something about how it must have been someone else, maybe Doreen, maybe a tourist who had stopped to look in the window. Russ shook his head. He paid for his bait. He left. He did not finish his coffee. He left it on the counter when he walked out. I went to the back office. I checked the security camera footage from the previous Friday night. The interior camera, the one I had installed myself in August, the one I had been using for inventory verification. I scrubbed through the footage from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. The shop was empty. The lights were off. The door was closed. There was no one in the parking lot. There was no man in a windbreaker. There was no one wearing the blue shirt with the shop logo. The footage was uninterrupted. The timestamp was continuous. The shop had been closed and dark for the entire window, exactly as the schedule said. I called Russ. I told him about the footage. I asked if he wanted to come look at it. He said no. He said he believed his eyes. He said he did not need to see the footage. He said something I have thought about every day since. He said, Matthew, your uncle and I had a conversation about 3 years ago. He told me that sometimes, late at night, he would see himself in the parking lot when he was inside the shop. And he told me he had stopped looking out the window after midnight because he did not like to see what was out there. I thought he was joking. I thought he was tired. I am calling you now to tell you that I do not think he was joking. I think you have a problem. I think you should call somebody. I do not know who, but I think you should call somebody. He hung up. I sat at the desk. I opened the legal pad. I went to item 4. Item 4 said, after midnight, do not look out the front windows of the shop. If you must look out, look at the floor first, then the windowsill, then the parking lot. Never look at the parking lot first. If you see yourself in the parking lot, close your eyes and count to 10 and look again. He will be gone. Do not go outside. Do not wave. Do not acknowledge. The note next to item 4 was dated October 2009, and in the note said, in my uncle's small, slanted handwriting, he waved at me first tonight. I waved back. I did not know what else to do. He looked happy. I have not been happy in a long time. I do not know what I taught him by waving back. I will not do it again. I read item 4 3 times in the back office on the morning of August 14th. I sat at the desk and I tried to think clearly about what I had been told and what I had read and what the security footage had shown. The footage was the part I kept coming back to. Russ Halloran was a man who had been awake at midnight, driving a road he had driven 1,000 times, with his headlights on, and he had seen me in the parking lot, and he had been certain enough about what he had seen to come back 6 days later and ask me about it. The interior camera had shown an empty shop. The two facts could not both be true unless the man Russ had seen had been in the parking lot but not in the shop, which meant he had been outside the camera's field of view, which meant he had existed in the world in a place the camera could not see. And the world had a name for the kind of thing that exists only outside the field of view of cameras. I want to tell you that I was scared at this point. I was not yet. I was uneasy. I was the kind of uneasy that a rational person becomes when his world contains 2 contradictions in 2 months and he cannot account for either of them. I was still telling myself that there were ordinary explanations. Russ might have been mistaken. Russ might have seen another man in a similar shirt. The man on July 24th might have been a regular customer of my uncle's who had heard the news of his death and been confused. Both of these explanations were thin, but they were available to me, and I held on to them. I held on to them until the third witness, who came into the story on September 3rd and who took the explanations away. The third witness was a woman named Margaret Nguyen. She was 41 years old. She was a dispatcher for the Dare County Sheriff's Office. I had never met her. I did not know she existed until she called the shop's landline at 9:14 a.m. on September 3rd, a Wednesday morning, and asked to speak to Donald Crane. I told her Donald Crane had passed away in June. I told her I was his nephew, Matthew, and I was running the shop now. I asked if I could help her with anything. There was a pause on the other end of the line. She said, "Mr. Crane, I'm sorry for your loss. I should have known. I apologize. I am calling because we have an open case file that lists this number as a contact for after-hours information about charter activity in the Buxton area, and I am doing a routine follow-up on a missing persons report. And I do not want to take up your time. I am sure you cannot help me, but I am required to make the call." I asked her what the missing persons report was about. She said it was about a charter captain named Jim Latham, who had been reported missing on July 25th, the morning after I had refused to sell Menhaden to the man in the windbreaker. The captain had been due back from a night charter at 6 a.m. on July 25th. He had not returned. His boat had been found drifting 12 miles offshore at noon. There had been no sign of him on board. There had been no sign of struggle. The boat had been in good condition. The fuel tank had been 3/4 full. The radio had been working. The captain's wallet, phone, and personal effects had been on the navigation table. The investigation had been ongoing for 6 weeks and had produced nothing. Then I asked Margaret why she was calling me about it. She said the file noted that Captain Latham was a regular customer at Crane's Bait and Tackle, that he had purchased bait at the shop on the night of July 24th, and that the shop's security camera had recorded him entering the shop at 11:47 p.m. and leaving at 11:51 p.m. with a bag of Menhaden. She said the investigators had reviewed the footage. She said they were trying to establish a timeline of his last known activities. She said she was calling to confirm that the footage was what they thought it was, and to ask if I had any additional information. I sat in the back office with the phone pressed to my ear, and I tried to keep my voice steady. I told her that I had taken over the shop in early July. I told her that I had been working the night shift on July 24th, and I told her that I did not remember a charter captain named Jim Latham coming in that night, but that I had been new to the shop and had not yet learned the names of all the regular customers, and that it was entirely possible he had come in and bought bait without me registering his name. I asked her if she could send me a still from the security footage so I could see who she was talking about. She said she could not send me a still over the phone, but she could email it. She asked for my email. I gave it to her. She said she would send it within the hour. I hung up. I sat at the desk. I waited. The email arrived at 9:41 a.m. I opened it on my laptop. The still was a black and white image from the shop's exterior camera, the one mounted above the front door, looking down at the parking lot and the front of the shop. Yet the timestamp on the bottom of the image said 23:47:14, July 24th. The image showed a man in a faded baseball cap and a windbreaker walking from a pickup truck toward the front door of the shop. The man was carrying nothing. His head was tilted slightly to the right, the way a person tilts their head when he is looking up at the camera mounted above the door. He was looking directly at the lens. He was smiling. He was the man I had refused to sell menhaden to. He was not Jim Latham. I did not know who Jim Latham was, but I knew who this man was, because he had been in my shop at 12:14 a.m. on July 24th, 27 minutes after this still had been taken, and I had refused to sell him bait, and he had walked out, and his car had not been in the parking lot when I had gone to look. The still showed him entering the shop at 11:47 p.m. So, according to Margaret, the footage showed him leaving at 11:51 p.m. with a bag of menhaden. I had been in the shop at 11:47 p.m. on July 24th. I had been sitting on the stool behind the counter reading a fishing magazine. The shop had been empty. No one had come in between 11 p.m. and 12:14 a.m. I was certain of this. I had been there. I had been awake. I had been the only person in the building. I picked up the phone. I called Margaret back. I told her I would like to come down to the sheriff's office and look at the full footage in person. She said that would be fine. She said she could have it ready for me at 1 p.m. I drove to the sheriff's office. Margaret met me at the front desk. She was a small woman with dark hair pulled back, wearing a department polo. She walked me back to a small conference room where a monitor was set up. She pulled up the footage from July 24th and let me watch. The footage showed the parking lot of my shop on the night of July 24th, between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. At 11:46 p.m., a pickup truck pulled into the lot. The man in the windbreaker got out. He walked to the front door. He looked up at the camera. He smiled. He went inside. The footage cut to the interior camera, which the sheriff's office had also been given access to, and which showed the inside of the shop. The interior footage showed the man walking up to the counter. It showed him talking to someone. The someone was a man in his late 20s or early 30s, wearing a blue shop polo, standing behind the counter. The someone was me. The someone had my face. The someone had my haircut. The someone was wearing the watch I had been wearing on July 24th, which was the watch I was wearing at that moment in the conference room, a stainless steel diving watch my father had given me for my college graduation. The footage showed the man in the windbreaker pointing at the bait tank. It showed me walking to the back of the shop. It showed me netting menhaden. It showed me bagging them. It showed me ringing up the sale. It showed me handing the bag across the counter. It showed the man paying me in cash. It showed the transaction taking exactly 4 minutes, from 11:47 p.m. to 11:51 p.m. It showed me smiling at him as he left. I had no memory of this transaction. It had not happened. I had been in the shop. I had been awake. I had been alone. I had been reading a fishing magazine. The man had not come in until 12:14 a.m., and I had refused to sell him bait. And he had walked out without buying anything. The footage showed both events. The footage showed the transaction at 11:47 to 11:51. The footage also showed, when Margaret scrolled forward, the second visit at 12:14 a.m. when the man had come in, and I had refused him, and he had left empty-handed. Both events were on the footage. Both had timestamps. Both had been recorded by the same cameras. The interior camera and the exterior camera both showed both events. The man in the windbreaker had come into my shop twice on the night of July 24th, 27 minutes apart, and I had served him the first time and refused him the second time, and I had no memory of the first visit. Margaret was watching me watch the footage. I could feel her watching me. She was a dispatcher, not a detective, but she had probably watched a lot of people watch a lot of footage in her career, and she knew how to read a face. She paused the video. She said, "Mr. Crane, are you all right?" I said I was. I asked her if she could play the audio from the first transaction. The cameras at the shop recorded audio along with video. I had configured them to do so when I installed the interior camera. She played the audio. The conversation between the man and the version of me on the screen was short. The man said, 5 dozen Menhaden. Cash. The version of me on the screen said, sure thing, Don. The version of me on the screen called the man Don. The version of me on the screen knew the man's name. The version of me on the screen sounded like me, with my voice, with my inflection, sure with the small upward lift at the end of sure thing that I have been told my whole life is a verbal tic I picked up from my mother. The version of me on the screen was me. He was just not me on July 24th at 11:47 p.m. I asked Margaret if I could get a copy of the footage. She said she would have to check with her supervisor, but she did not see why not, since it was footage from my own camera and my own shop. She made a copy onto a flash drive and gave it to me. She told me she would be in touch if there were any developments in the Latham case. She walked me to the front door. She shook my hand. She held my hand for a second longer than was normal, and she said, very quietly, Mr. Crane, I knew your uncle. He came in here twice in the last 5 years to file reports on missing customers. Both times, the customers were charter captains who had bought bait from him on the night they disappeared. Both times the cases went nowhere. I am telling you this because I think you should know. I am not telling you this in any official capacity. I am telling you this as a person who is trying to be helpful. I would think very carefully about whether you want to keep that shop. She let go of my hand. She went back inside. I drove back to the shop. I did not go in. I sat in my car in the parking lot, and I called Doreen on her cell phone. I asked her if she could come over to the trailer because I needed to ask her some questions, and I did not want to ask them in the shop. She said she would be home in 20 minutes. She was at the grocery store. I waited in my car. I watched the front of the shop. I tried not to think about the footage. I tried not to think about the version of me that had served the man at 11:47 p.m., the version that had called him Don, the version that had a voice that was indistinguishable from mine. I tried not to think about the fact that the man had come back 27 minutes later, after the version of me had served him the first time, and had asked for Menhaden again, and had called me Don, and had said, I know, when I told him my uncle had passed away. I tried not to think about what it meant that he had come back, after he had already been served, after he had already left with a bag of bait. I tried not to think about Jim Latham, whose name I did not know, whose face I had not seen, who had bought bait from my shop on the night he disappeared, except that he had not, because the man on the footage was not Jim Latham. So the man on the footage was the man in the windbreaker, and Jim Latham was somewhere else. Doreen pulled into the gravel drive in her old Ford pickup at 2:30 p.m. She got out and she looked at me and she said, You found out about the second visit, didn't you? I said, Doreen, you knew about this? She said, Come inside. I will make coffee. I am going to tell you what your uncle told me, and then I am going to tell you what I have figured out on my own, and then you are going to make a decision about what to do next, and I am not going to try to influence you. I am too old to influence anyone. We went into her trailer. She made coffee. She sat across from me at the small kitchen table. She told me what she knew. She told me that my uncle had first noticed the second visit pattern in 2007. A charter captain had come into the shop one night in October and bought bait. 3 hours later, the same captain had come back and asked for the same bait. My uncle had been confused. He had told the captain he had already sold him bait that night. The captain had insisted he had not been in the shop yet. They had argued. The captain had eventually left without buying anything. The next day, the captain had not returned from his charter. His body had been found 2 weeks later, washed up on a beach near Hatteras. The autopsy had been inconclusive. The official cause of death had been listed as drowning. My uncle had reviewed the security footage. The footage had shown the captain entering the shop twice. The first visit had shown the captain talking to my uncle, buying bait, and leaving. My uncle had no memory of the first visit, and in the second visit had shown the conversation my uncle did remember, in which the captain had insisted he had not been in the shop yet. My uncle had started keeping records after that. He had tracked every instance of a charter captain coming in twice in one night, at intervals between 2 and 4 hours apart. He had found a pattern. The pattern had 3 components. First, the second visit always occurred when the captain insisted he had not yet bought bait. Second, the captain who made the second visit always disappeared within 48 hours, either at sea or on land, in ways that were never satisfactorily explained. Third, the captain who made the first visit was not the captain at all. The captain who made the first visit was something that looked like the captain, that had the captain's face and voice and clothing, that knew the captain's name and the captain's order and the captain's payment habits. But that was not the captain, because the real captain was somewhere else, and the real captain was, by the time of the first visit, almost certainly already in trouble. My uncle had developed item 1 to break the pattern. He had reasoned that if he could refuse the first visit, the second visit would not need to occur, because the second visit was the captain coming to the shop to do the thing that had already been done in his name. He had tested this hypothesis on a new moon in 2008. A captain had come in at 11 p.m. and asked for menhaden. My uncle had refused. He had told the captain the tanks were empty. The captain had left. No second visit had occurred. The captain had returned safely from his charter the next morning. And he had come into the shop 2 days later and asked my uncle why he had refused to sell him bait. My uncle had not known what to say. The pattern, my uncle had concluded, was tied to the new moon. The first visit, the imitation visit, only occurred on the night of a new moon. The disappearance only occurred when the imitation visit was completed. By refusing to sell bait on a new moon, my uncle could prevent the imitation from completing and thereby prevent the disappearance. He had been doing this for 18 years. He had refused every late-night sale on every new moon since 2008. He had saved, by his own count, somewhere between 20 and 30 charter captains. He had never told any of them. He had concluded that telling them would not help, because the captains who came in at midnight on a new moon were not the captains, and the captains who would have died if he had served them would have died because they were going to be replaced, and explaining the system to them would not change the system. I asked Doreen what had happened on July 24th. I had refused to sell bait at 12:14 a.m. The system, by my uncle's logic, should have been broken, but the footage showed an earlier sale, at 11:47 p.m., that had been completed. The captain, Jim Latham, had disappeared anyway. Doreen was quiet for a long time. She said, "Matthew, I think the answer is that the first visit was not the imitation. I think the first visit was the captain. The real captain. The captain came in at 11:47, bought his bait, and left, and went out on his charter, and disappeared. The second visit, the one at 12:14, the one you remember, the one where the man called you Don and said, 'I know,' when you told him about your uncle, that was the imitation. The imitation came back to the shop after the captain was already gone. It came back to verify that you had served the captain. It came back because the system needs both visits to complete. Your uncle's rule was wrong, or your uncle's rule had been correct for the old pattern, but the pattern had changed, or the imitation had figured out that refusing the second visit was no longer effective. I asked her what the imitation wanted. She said she did not know. She said she had never figured that out. She said her own theory, which she had developed over 22 years of living behind the shop, was that the imitations were not visitors. The imitations were not coming from somewhere else. The imitations were the shop. Yet the shop had been there for 38 years under my uncle, and possibly longer than that under whoever had owned it before. The shop had been collecting something, slowly, the way a bait tank collects sediment at the bottom, and the imitations were the shop releasing what it had collected, in the form of the people who had passed through it most often. The captains who disappeared were captains who had been in and out of the shop for years. The shop knew them. The shop could make copies of them. The copies were what came in on the night of a new moon. I asked her why she still lived behind the shop, if she believed this. She said, because the rule about Wednesday morning, the one about draining the tanks with well water, that one is mine. Your uncle paid me $40 to do it when he was sick. He had me do it twice. As the third time he tried to pay me, I told him I would do it for free if he answered some questions. He answered them. I have been doing it every Wednesday since, even when he was alive. The well water is what slows it down. The tanks are how it gets out. If the tanks are not drained on Wednesday morning before sunrise, the imitations come more often. Once a month becomes twice a month. Twice a month becomes once a week. I have lived behind that shop for 22 years. I have my own reasons for not wanting it to come more often. One of them is that I am old, and I sleep with my windows open. And I have heard the imitations in the parking lot at night, and I have heard one of them more than once with my husband's voice. She did not look at me when she said the last part. She looked at her coffee. And I want to tell you that I sold the shop the next week. I did not. I want to tell you that I followed every rule and I survived the next new moon and everything was fine. I cannot tell you that either. What happened next is the part I have not told anyone, the part that brings me to October 11th, the part that involves the fourth witness, who is the one I owe an apology to, and who is the reason I am telling this story now. The fourth witness was a man named Christopher Vega. He was 26 years old. He was a graduate student at East Carolina University studying marine biology. He had contacted me by email in mid-August, 2 weeks before Margaret's call, asking if he could conduct field research at my shop. He was studying the gut contents of bait fish to track microplastic distribution in the Pamlico Sound. He needed access to a high-volume bait supplier, and he had been given my uncle's name by his thesis advisor, who had apparently corresponded with my uncle a few years earlier about a similar project that had never materialized. I had said yes. I had said yes because I wanted the company. The shop was lonely. Doreen was kind, but she kept her distance after the first month, and the charter captains came and went without conversation. Yet Christopher offered to pay me a small fee for access to the tanks and to spend 2 nights a week at the shop, sampling fish and recording data. He came with a cooler, a microscope, and a small notebook in which he made meticulous entries in pencil. He was quiet and professional. He drank black coffee. He listened more than he talked. He reminded me of myself at his age, before I had become a person who watched a fishing magazine at midnight in a building that was watching me back. Christopher started his fieldwork on August 19th. 5 days after Russ Halloran told me he had seen me in the parking lot. I did not tell Christopher about Russ. I did not tell Christopher about the man in the windbreaker. I did not tell Christopher about the legal pad. And I told Christopher that I appreciated his quiet company and that he should treat the shop as his own, and that the only rule I needed him to follow was that the bait tanks were to be left alone on Tuesday nights because I cleaned them on Wednesday mornings before sunrise, and I needed the sediment undisturbed to monitor the chemistry. He nodded. He wrote it down in his notebook. He never violated the rule. I did not tell him about the rest of the rules. I did not tell him about item 3. I did not tell him not to answer the phone between 2 and 4 a.m. That is the part I owe him an apology for. That is the part I think about every night. The new moon in September fell on the night of the 22nd. I had been preparing for it for 2 weeks. I had told Christopher I needed him to take that night off, because I was expecting a delivery and I needed the back room clear. He had not questioned it. He had agreed easily and had gone back to Greenville to spend the night with his girlfriend. The shop was empty except for me from 9 p.m. onward. I had locked the front door at midnight, against my uncle's normal practice of leaving it open for the early morning captains, because I did not want to be in a position where someone could walk in. I had decided, after the conversation with Doreen, that item 1 was no longer reliable as a defense. I had decided that on new moon nights, I would simply close the shop entirely, refuse all customers, and wait for sunrise. The night of September 22nd passed without incident. The phone did not ring. No one came to the door, and I sat in the back office with the legal pad in front of me, and I read all 11 items twice. I went home at 6 a.m. when the first charter captain pulled into the parking lot and saw the closed sign and drove away. I slept until noon. When I woke up, I checked the security footage. The footage showed an empty parking lot all night. The shop had been undisturbed. I had broken the pattern. Or so I thought. Christopher came back on September 24th, a Wednesday, in the afternoon. He came in carrying his cooler and his notebook and his coffee. He set everything down on the counter. He looked at me. He said, "Matt, I need to talk to you about something. I don't want to make it weird, but I got a phone call last night around 3 a.m. The number was the shop's landline. The voicemail was you. You were asking me to come to the shop. You said there was an emergency with the tanks. You said you needed help. I was about to drive over, but I called you back first, and your cell phone went straight to voicemail. I called the shop, and the line was busy. I sat in my car in Greenville for an hour trying to reach you. Eventually, I went back inside and went to bed. I figured if it was a real emergency, you would have called my cell. But I want to know what was going on. Were you trying to reach me?" I had not called Christopher at 3 a.m. on the night of September 23rd. I had been at home in bed, asleep, with my phone on silent. I had not been at the shop. The shop's landline could not have called him because no one was there to dial it. I asked him if he still had the voicemail. He said yes. He pulled out his phone and he played it for me. The voicemail was 37 seconds long. The voice on the voicemail was my voice. It was my voice in a way that was indistinguishable from my voice. The voice said, "Hey, Christopher, it's Matt. I'm at the shop. There's a problem with the Menhaden tank. The pump is making a weird noise, and the water level is dropping faster than it should be. I think there's a leak. I could really use a hand getting them transferred to the holding tank before they all die. I know it's late. I'm sorry. If you can come down, that would be great. Just let yourself in the back door. The key is under the third brick on the left side of the steps. I'll be in the back room. Thanks." The voicemail was perfect. The voice was perfect. The information about the brick was correct. The third brick on the left side of the back steps did, in fact, conceal a spare key. I had told Christopher about it on his second day at the shop, in case he ever needed to get in early. The information about the Menhaden tank pump was plausible, because the pump had been making intermittent noise for 2 weeks, and I had mentioned this to Christopher more than once. The voice knew the things I would have known. The voice asked for the things I would have asked for. The voice was me, asking Christopher to come to the shop alone, in the dark, on the night after a new moon, and to use the spare key, and to come to the back room. I stood at the counter, and I listened to the voicemail, and I felt something in my body that I had not felt before. The fear up to that point had been theoretical. It had been the fear of a man who was processing strange information at his own pace, in his own time, and in the safety of a back office during daylight hours. The fear at this moment was different. The fear at this moment was the fear of a man who understood, suddenly and completely, that something had been making preparations. The voicemail had been made for Christopher. The voice had used Christopher's name. The voice had asked Christopher to come to the back room. The thing that had made the voicemail had known Christopher existed. It had known his phone number. It had known he had been working at the shop. It had known he would respond to a request from me. It had known about the brick and the spare key and the pump. The thing had been listening. The thing had been gathering information. And the thing had been waiting for a night when Christopher would be home alone in Greenville, and I would be home alone in the rented room I was staying in down the road from Doreen's trailer, and it had used that night to call him with my voice, to invite him to come to the shop alone. I asked Christopher what he would have done if he had been able to reach the shop on the landline. He said he would have driven over. He said he would not have hesitated. He said he liked me, he respected my uncle, and he had been waiting for an opportunity to be useful to the shop. He said if I had told him to come to the back room, he would have come to the back room. I told Christopher he could not come to the shop anymore. I did not tell him why. And I told him the research project was no longer feasible, and that I needed to focus on running the business, and that I could not afford the time to support his fieldwork. He was confused. He was hurt. He had 3 more months of sampling planned. He asked if there was anything he could do to change my mind. I told him there was not. I told him I was sorry. I told him I would refund his fees. He left the cooler. He left the notebook. He took his coffee. He drove back to Greenville. I have not seen him since. I want to tell you that this was the moment I decided to sell the shop. It was not. It was the moment I decided I had to find a way to stop the thing without letting it know I was trying to stop it. I went to Doreen's trailer that evening. I told her about the voicemail. I told her what I had been thinking. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she sat for a long time looking at her hands. She said, "Matthew, I am going to tell you something I have not told you yet. There is a 12th item. Your uncle did not put it on the legal pad. He told me about it instead. He told me about it because he did not want to write it down. He said writing it down would make it true. He said keeping it as a verbal instruction would keep it as something that could still be denied. I think he was wrong about that, but he was the one with the rules, and I respected his choices." I asked her what the 12th item was. She said, "The 12th item is that you can leave. The 12th item is that the shop only owns the people who agree to be owned by it. Your uncle agreed. He agreed by staying. He agreed by following the rules. It's just by maintaining the system, by drinking the well water, by keeping the captains alive year after year. The shop offered him a contract, and he accepted. And the contract was that he would manage the shop, and the shop would let him live, and the shop would eventually let him die in his sleep at 71 without any pain. He told me 3 years ago that the shop had told him this. He told me the shop had spoken to him in his uncle's voice late one night and had offered him a clean death if he kept the system going. He had accepted. He died in June at 71 in his sleep with no warning. The autopsy said heart failure. There was no pain. He got what he was promised. She paused. She looked at me. She said, "You have not yet accepted. The shop knows this. The shop has been making preparations. As the voicemail to Christopher was a test, the shop wanted to know if you would let it have him. You did not, but only because Christopher could not reach you on your cell, which was luck. Next time, the shop will arrange things so that the test cannot be failed. The shop is patient. The shop has 38 years of patience. You have, in my estimate, a few weeks to make a decision. You can accept the contract the way your uncle did, and you can run the shop for the rest of your life, and you will be safe, and you will die quietly. Or you can refuse, and you can leave, and you can sell the property, and you can walk away. The shop will not follow you. The shop is the shop. It is rooted in the building and the land. It does not travel." I asked her how she knew the shop did not travel. She said, "Because if it traveled, and it would have followed me into my trailer 20 years ago, and it has not. The trailer is 20 feet from the back wall of the shop, and I have lived in it for 22 years, and the shop has never come for me. I have been close enough to hear it. I have not been close enough to be claimed. The land matters. The building matters. If you sell the contract along with the land. The new owner inherits the system. You walk away clean." I asked her if she knew this for certain. She said, "I know it the way I know that the well water works on Wednesday morning. I have tested it by living. I have not died. The information is not perfect, but it is the information I have." I went back to the shop that night. I sat in the back office. I read the legal pad again. I thought about my uncle. Yet I thought about the 18 years he had spent following the rules, the 20 or 30 captains he had saved by refusing late-night sales on new moons, the 2 captains he had reported missing to Margaret, the autopsy that had said heart failure, the clean death he had been promised, the clean death he had received. I thought about the fact that he had left me the shop. I thought about whether leaving me the shop had been a kindness, an act of love from an uncle to a nephew, or whether it had been a recruitment, a transfer of the contract from one crane to another, a way of keeping the system fed with someone the shop already had a relationship with. I thought about Christopher Vega in his car in Greenville at 3 a.m, trying to reach me, at ready to drive 2 hours to the back room of a building where something was waiting with my voice. I made my decision that night. I decided I would sell the shop. I would sell it to a buyer who knew nothing about it. I would not warn the buyer. I would take the money and I would go. I tell you this because it is what I decided, and because the decision is part of why I am alive to tell this story. And also because the decision is the source of the guilt I have carried since October 11th, which is a different guilt from the guilt about Christopher, and which I am also going to tell you about. I listed the property on October 1st. I listed it through a commercial real estate broker out of Manteo named Sandra Whitfield. I told Sandra I wanted a quick sale, that I was willing to take a discount for cash, that I needed to be out by November 1st. She told me she could move it. The Outer Banks commercial market was hot. A turnkey bait and tackle business with 38 years of operating history and a strong cash flow would attract buyers within days. She listed it on October 2nd. She had 3 offers by October 6th. I accepted the highest offer on October 8th. The buyer was a man named David Hartshorn, a retired insurance executive from Charlotte who had been wanting to own a small business on the coast since his retirement. He was 64 years old. He had a wife and 2 adult children. He was paying cash. The closing was scheduled for October 28th. I felt sick. I felt sick the entire week. I felt sick about David Hartshorn, whom I had never met, who was about to inherit a contract he did not know existed. Well, I told myself that Doreen had inherited the trailer's proximity to the shop without knowing what was in the shop, and she had survived for 22 years by developing her own rules, and David Hartshorn could do the same. I told myself that I was selling a building, not a curse, and that the curse was not a real thing in any legal or moral sense, and that I had no obligation to disclose folklore to a buyer. I told myself that my uncle had not disclosed it to me. I told myself many things. None of them helped. The new moon in October fell on the 21st. The closing was on the 28th. I had to survive one more new moon at the shop before I could hand over the keys. I planned to do what I had done in September. Close the shop entirely on the night of the new moon. Lock the doors. Go home. Wait for sunrise. October 11th. The night of the contradictory recordings was 10 days before the new moon. It was not supposed to be a dangerous night. I had no reason to expect anything to happen. I had been at the shop alone, doing inventory in preparation for the handover. I had locked up at 9:47 p.m., exactly as the gas station camera and Doreen and Russ had observed. I had walked to my car. I had driven home. I had gone to bed. The next morning I came back to the shop at 5 a.m. for the captains. I checked the security camera footage as part of my normal morning routine. I had been checking it every morning since the Latham incident, looking for anything unusual. The footage from October 11th showed me locking the door at 9:47 p.m. The footage from the interior camera showed me locking the door from the inside at 9:47 p.m. and walking back into the shop. I want to be precise about what the interior footage showed. The interior footage showed me, in the same blue shop polo I had been wearing, locking the front door from the inside at 9:47 p.m. It then showed me walking across the shop to the back office. It showed me sitting down at the desk. It showed me opening the bottom drawer and taking out the legal pad. It showed me reading the legal pad for 46 minutes until 10:33 p.m. It showed me closing the legal pad and putting it back in the drawer. It then showed me standing up, walking to the bait tanks, and standing in front of the Menhaden tank for 2 hours and 14 minutes. I did not move during those 2 hours and 14 minutes. The version of me in the footage stood completely still in front of the Menhaden tank from 10:34 p.m. to 12:48 a.m., with my hands at my sides, and not blinking, not shifting weight. At 12:48 a.m., the version of me turned away from the tank. He walked to the front door. He unlocked it from the inside. He opened it. He walked out into the parking lot. He locked the door behind him from the outside. He stood in the parking lot for 9 minutes. Then he walked out of frame in the direction of the highway, and the cameras did not see him again. I had been at home in bed during all of this. My own cell phone, GPS, which I checked obsessively, confirmed that I had been at my rented room from 10:02 p.m. until 6:47 a.m. the next morning, when I left for the shop. There was no version of me at the shop during those hours. There could not have been. The footage was on my interior camera, which I had installed myself, which was connected to a hard drive in the back office that I had configured myself, which had no remote access, which could not have been tampered with by anyone outside the shop. The footage was real. The version of me on it was real, in the sense that the cameras had recorded something that had a body and a face and a shape that the cameras had interpreted as me. I sat in the back office on the morning of October 12th, and I watched the footage 3 times. I watched the version of me stand in front of the Menhaden tank for 2 hours and 14 minutes without moving. I watched the version of me walk out into the parking lot. I watched the version of me walk away from the shop, in the direction of the highway, in the direction of my rented room, in the direction of my bed. The shop had not been waiting for the new moon. The shop had been making a copy of me in advance. The shop had been preparing for the night when I would refuse the contract and try to leave. The copy had been practicing. The closing was 16 days away. I did not know if the copy was finished yet. I did not know if it could already pass for me, in the daylight, in front of David Hartshorn, in front of Sandra Whitfield, in front of a notary public at a closing table. I did not know if the copy was being made to take my place at the shop so that the contract would be honored without my consent, or if the copy was being made to do something else, somewhere else, after I left. I sat in the back office and I tried to think about what to do. I tried to think about whether the man Russ Halloran had seen in August had been a copy that was still in development, an early version, a prototype. I tried to think about whether the version of me that had served Jim Latham at 11:47 p.m. on July 24th had been the same kind of copy, an earlier model made for a different purpose. I tried to think about what the shop had been doing for 18 years, all those nights when my uncle had been alone in the building, all those hours when the cameras had not been installed, all those things my uncle had not written down. I tried to think about what my uncle had looked like in the casket. I had only seen him once, briefly, before the funeral. The skin around his mouth had looked wrong. I had attributed it to the embalming. I was thinking about it differently now. I drove to Doreen's trailer that morning at 7 a.m. before she was awake, and I sat on her porch and I waited. She came out at 7:30 in her bathrobe with a cup of coffee, and she did not seem surprised to see me. She sat down in the chair next to mine. She looked at the highway. She did not ask why I was there. I told her about the footage. I described what the copy had done in the shop the night before. I described the 2 hours and 14 minutes in front of the Menhaden tank. I described the walk into the parking lot, the lock from the outside, the 9 minutes of standing, the departure toward the highway. She listened. When I finished, she set down her coffee. She said, "Matthew, your uncle had a copy too. He found out about it in 2019. He was 65 years old. He told me about it in the summer of 2020, when he thought he was having a stroke, and he asked me to drive him to the hospital. He was in the passenger seat of my truck, and he was scared, and he started telling me things he had been keeping to himself for a long time. The copy of him was almost finished by 2019. He had seen it 3 times on the security footage, once standing in front of the Menhaden tank, once walking through the back room, once sitting at the desk in the back office writing in the legal pad. He was certain about the third one because the handwriting in the legal pad had changed a few weeks earlier. There were entries he did not remember writing. The handwriting was his, but the entries were not his. He had compared them to entries from years earlier. The new entries were slightly off, the way a forgery is slightly off when it is good but not perfect. And I asked her what the new entries had said. She said, "He did not tell me. He told me that the new entries were the reason he agreed to the contract. He told me he had read the new entries and he had understood what was being prepared, and he had decided that the clean death was preferable to the alternative. The alternative was that the copy would be completed and he would be replaced, and the copy would run the shop for the rest of what would have been his natural life. And then the copy would arrange for the shop to be inherited by the next person in the family, and the next person in the family would inherit a shop that already had a fully formed copy waiting for them, and the cycle would continue." She looked at me. She said, "I think he agreed to the contract to break the cycle, and I think he died at 71 because he asked to die at 71. He told me, the day he came back from the hospital, that he had not had a stroke after all. He said the doctors had found nothing. He said he had been given a number of years and that he was going to use them to figure out how to leave the shop, to someone the shop did not yet have a copy of. He said the shop had been working on his copy for at least 20 years. He said it took the shop that long to make a copy that could function in daylight. He said the shop needed a slow exposure. He said you had only been at the shop for 4 months. He said your copy could not possibly be ready. He said if he died and you sold the shop quickly, before the copy was complete, you would walk away clean and the cycle would break." She picked up her coffee. She drank from it. As she set it down, she said, "Matthew, I am telling you this because I think your uncle was wrong about the timeline. I think the shop has been making your copy faster than he expected. I think the shop knew about you before he died. I think the shop started on your copy years ago, the first time you visited as a child, the summers you spent here in the 90s. I think 4 months at the shop was not the start of your exposure. It was the completion of it. The copy you saw on the footage last night is not an early version. It is close to ready. The 2 hours and 14 minutes in front of the Menhaden tank was not practice. It was calibration. The walk into the parking lot was a test. The shop is testing whether the copy can pass for you outside the building. I think the answer is yes, or close to yes. Yea, and I think the shop knows you are about to sell, and I think the shop is going to use the copy to do something that will keep you here." I asked her what. She said, "I do not know, but I would think very carefully about what your copy could do in the next 16 days that would make it impossible for you to leave. A crime, a debt, a fight with someone who would press charges, a relationship with a woman who would convince you to stay, a medical emergency that could be staged. The copy can pass for you. The copy can use your name. The copy can sign your name. The copy can call your buyer and cancel the sale. The copy can do anything you can do, and you cannot stop it from doing those things because you will be at home, asleep, while it does them. The only way to stop the copy is to leave the area. The shop does not travel. Doreen does not get followed into her trailer. You will not be followed into Raleigh. But you have to get to Raleigh, and you have to get there before the copy does something that brings you back. I drove from Doreen's trailer directly to my rented room. I packed my clothes into 2 duffel bags. I packed my laptop and the legal pad and the flash drive Margaret had given me and the printouts of the security footage I had been making for documentation. I left the rented room. I drove to the bait shop. I went into the back office. I disconnected the hard drive from the camera system. I put the hard drive in my car. I went back inside. I left the lights on. I left the bait tanks running. I left the cash register open and empty. I locked the front door behind me from the outside. I drove to Doreen's trailer. I knocked on the door, and I gave her a key to the front of the shop. I told her she could let David Hartshorn in when he arrived for the closing. I told her to tell him that I had been called away on a family emergency and that the closing would have to be conducted remotely. I told her I would handle the paperwork through Sandra Whitfield. I told her I was sorry. I told her thank you. She took the key. She did not say anything for a long moment. Then she said, "Matthew, the copy is going to come here looking for you. It will come here in the next few days. It will tell me you have changed your mind about selling. It will ask me for the key back. I am going to give the key back. I am going to give it to the copy because I am not going to lie to a thing that has your face. I am too old for that. I am sorry." I told her I understood. I told her to give it the key. Yeah, I told her not to die for me. She said, "I have not died for anyone yet. I am not going to start now." I drove to Raleigh. I drove the entire 7 hours without stopping except for gas. I checked my mirrors the entire way. I did not see anything following me. I arrived at my apartment in Raleigh at 4:15 in the afternoon. I locked the door. I closed the curtains. I sat on the floor of my living room with the hard drive next to me, and I tried to think. I called Sandra Whitfield. I told her I had been called away on a family emergency. I told her I needed to handle the closing remotely. She was confused but accommodating. She said she could arrange a remote closing through a notary in Raleigh. She said it would add a few days to the timeline, but it was doable. I asked her to do it. Yes, I told her I would not be returning to the Outer Banks for any reason. I asked her to make sure all communications about the sale went through email, not phone calls, because my phone reception was poor where I was. She agreed. I called David Hartshorn. I introduced myself. I told him I was sorry I would not be meeting him in person. I asked him a series of questions about the shop, the kind of questions a buyer would expect. I made small talk. I tried to get a sense of him as a person. He was pleasant. He was excited about the shop. He asked me what advice I would give him as a new owner. I thought for a long time about what to say. I told him to make sure he drained the bait tanks every Wednesday morning before sunrise, with the well water from the tap behind the building, and to pay the woman in the trailer behind the shop $40 to do it if he could not do it himself. I told him that the shop had been operating for 38 years on a specific schedule, and that the schedule mattered to the regular customers and to the maintenance of the building. I told him to read the legal pad in the bottom drawer of the desk in the back office, and to follow the items in it, even if they did not make sense to him, because they were the accumulated wisdom of two owners who had run the shop successfully for a combined 38 years. He laughed. He said he appreciated the advice. He said he was looking forward to learning the business. I hung up. I sat on the floor of my apartment. I had told him about the legal pad. I had told him to follow the items. I had not told him what the items were for. Now, I had not told him about the copies. I had not told him about Christopher Vega's voicemail. I had not told him about Jim Latham. I had not told him about my uncle's clean death and the contract he had agreed to in order to die at 71 without pain. I had told him enough to give him a chance. I had told him too little to give him the truth. I told myself that this was the best I could do. I told myself that telling him the truth would have meant losing the sale, because no one buys a building that has been described to them as a 38-year contract with something that makes copies of its owners. I told myself that David Hartshorn would read the legal pad, would follow the items, would develop his own rules over time, would survive the way Doreen had survived, the way my uncle had survived for 18 years. That I told myself that David Hartshorn would have a chance. I do not believe myself when I tell myself these things. I am telling you this because I want you to know that I do not believe myself. I want you to know that I made the trade. I want you to know that I sold a man a building I knew was making copies of its owners, and I did not warn him properly, because warning him properly would have cost me money and freedom, and I chose money and freedom. The closing happened on October 30th, 2 days later than originally scheduled. Sandra Whitfield handled it remotely. I signed the documents in front of a notary in Raleigh. David Hartshorn signed them in front of a notary in Manteo. The funds transferred. The shop was no longer mine. I have not been back to the Outer Banks. I have not contacted Doreen. I have not contacted David Hartshorn. Yet I have not contacted Christopher Vega, although I think about him often, and I think I owe him an apology that I am not brave enough to make. I have not contacted Russ Halloran. I have not contacted Margaret Nguyen, although I have wondered whether the Latham case was ever closed. I want to tell you that the story ends here. I sold the shop. I walked away. The copy did not follow me. The shop does not travel. I am safe in Raleigh, in my apartment, with the curtains closed. The story does not end here. 6 weeks ago, on the night of February 18th, my phone rang at 3:12 in the morning. The number was a North Carolina area code I did not recognize. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was 41 seconds long. The voice on the voicemail was Doreen Pickett. The voice said, "Matthew, it's Doreen. I'm sorry to call you so late. I know you said not to. I needed to tell you that the new owner has been doing well. He follows the legal pad. He has not had any incidents that I'm aware of. The shop is running smoothly. He is a kind man. I think he will be all right. I am calling because I want you to know that I went over to the shop yesterday afternoon to drop off some banana bread, and I saw you in the back office. You were sitting at the desk. You were reading the legal pad. The new owner was not there. The shop was empty except for you. I knocked on the window. You looked up at me and you smiled. You waved. You did not seem surprised to see me. I went around to the front door and it was locked. By the time I got the key from David and got back inside, you were gone. The legal pad was on the desk where you had left it, and then the chair was pushed back the way you used to push it back when you stood up quickly. Matthew, I am calling because I think the copy is still at the shop. I think it has been there since you left. I think David does not know it is there. I think it comes out when he is not in the building. I do not know what it does. I do not know what it is waiting for. I am calling because I think you should know. I am not going to call you again. I am sorry. Goodbye. I listened to the voicemail 7 times. I have not deleted it. It is still on my phone. I have not called Doreen back. I have not called David Hartshorn. I have not contacted anyone on the Outer Banks. I have been thinking, every night since February 18th, about what the copy is waiting for. Yet I have been thinking about whether it is waiting for David Hartshorn to die in his sleep, at the age the shop has assigned to him, the way my uncle died at 71. I have been thinking about whether the copy is the thing that has the contract now, the thing that operates the shop in the in-between hours when the owner is asleep, the thing that maintains the system on behalf of the building. I have been thinking about whether my uncle's clean death was not a reward, but a transfer, the moment when the contract passed from him to the copy of him, and whether the copy of him is what walked through the funeral home in late June and let me see it briefly in the casket with the slightly wrong skin around the mouth. I have been thinking about whether I am still part of the system in some way, even though I left. And I have been thinking about whether the copy at the shop is still tied to me, the way Doreen said the contract is tied to the land, and whether some part of me is therefore still at the shop. sitting at the desk, reading the legal pad, waving at Doreen from the back office window on a winter afternoon. I have not slept through the night since February 18th. I keep my curtains closed during the day as well as at night because I do not want to look out of my window and see myself in the parking lot of my apartment building, the way Russ Halloran saw me in the parking lot of the shop on the night I was in Norfolk. I do not look at my reflection in dark windows. I do not answer calls from numbers I do not recognize. I have changed my phone number twice. The voicemail from Doreen has come through on both new numbers, exactly as I described it. Yet with a North Carolina area code I do not recognize, on dates I cannot predict. The voicemail is the same voicemail every time. The wording does not change. The length does not change. Doreen Pickett, as far as I have been able to determine through public records, died on November 14th of last year, 3 weeks after I left the Outer Banks, of natural causes, in her trailer behind the bait shop. She was 68 years old. The death certificate is on file with the Dare County Register of Deeds. I have a copy of it in a folder in my desk drawer. The voicemail is not from Doreen. The voicemail has never been from Doreen. The voicemail is from the shop, using her voice, the way the shop used my voice to call Christopher Vega, the way the shop used my uncle's voice to offer him a clean death. The shop knows my phone number. The shop has known every phone number I have used for the past 8 months. The shop is still working on something. I do not know what. Comment where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I am asking because the voicemail comes through at 3:12 in the morning every time, and I have started to suspect that 3:12 in the morning has a meaning I do not yet understand. And I want to know if any of you are awake at 3:12 in the morning and what you hear when you are. The shop is still on the highway between Avon and Buxton. David Hartshorn still owns it. The legal pad is still in the bottom drawer of the desk in the back office. The bait tanks are still drained on Wednesday mornings before sunrise, with the well water from the tap behind the building. The new moons still come once a month. The captains still come at 4 in the morning. Russ Halloran still buys 2 dozen mullet and a dozen pinfish 3 or 4 times a week. The shop still makes $90,000 a year in profit. The system is still running. The copy is still at the shop. The copy is reading the legal pad in the back office in the afternoons, when David Hartshorn is at home with his wife. The copy is waving at Doreen, who is dead, through the window. The copy is waiting for something I cannot name. I am the only person who knows the copy is there. David Hartshorn does not know. The charter captains do not know. Margaret Nguyen does not know. Christopher Vega does not know. The previous owner of the shop, my uncle, knew, but he is dead, and his copy knows, and his copy is presumably still part of the system, somewhere, doing whatever copies do when they are not visible to anyone. I should call David Hartshorn. I should warn him. I have his number. I have his email. I have Sandra Whitfield's number, and I could ask her to put me in touch with him. I have done none of these things. I have not done them because I am afraid that if I make the call, the copy will hear it, and the copy will come for me, the way it almost came for Christopher. That is the choice I have made. I made it on October 12th when I packed my bags. I made it again on October 30th when I closed on the sale. I made it again on November 14th when Doreen died and I did not go to her funeral. I am making it again now. Every day I do not call David Hartshorn. I am telling you this story because I want one person somewhere to know what I did. And I want one person to know that there is a bait shop on the highway between Avon and Buxton and that the man who owns it does not know what he owns, and that the man who sold it to him knew, and the man who sold it to him decided not to tell him. If you are ever driving down the Outer Banks, late at night, on the stretch of highway between Avon and Buxton, and you see a bait shop with the lights on, do not stop. Do not buy menhaden. Do not buy mullet. Do not buy pinfish. Do not look at the man behind the counter. Do not look in the parking lot. Do not look at the trailer behind the building, where a woman who is dead may be standing at her kitchen window, waving. Keep driving. Drive until the lights of the shop are gone from your rearview mirror. Drive until you are well past Buxton. Drive until you are off the island. The shop does not travel. The copies do not travel. But the system is still active, and the system is still hiring, and the next person who inherits the shop will inherit a building that already has 2 copies waiting in it, mine and my uncle's, and possibly more by then, depending on how long David Hartshorn lasts. The cycle is not broken. I did not break it. I only stepped out of it. I am sorry, David Hartshorn. I am sorry, Christopher Vega. I am sorry, Doreen Pickett. Wherever you actually are, if you are anywhere at all, I am sorry. I am safe. I am alive. I do not know if those 3 things can all be true at once.